and dance, so that the particular emotional meaning of the rhythm and tune employed was brought out into perfect lucidity by the accompanying words and gestures. Thus we find, for example, that Plato characterizes a tendency in his own time to the separation of melody and verse, as a sign of a want of true artistic taste. For, he says, it is very hard, in the absence of words, to distinguish the exact character of the mood which the rhythm and tune is supposed to represent. In this connection, it may be interesting to refer to the use of leitmotif in modern music. Here, too, a particular idea, if not a particular set of words, is associated with a particular musical phrase, the intention of the practice being clearly the same as that which is indicated in the passage just quoted, namely to add precision and definiteness to the vague emotional content of pure music. And this determining effect of words was further enhanced, in the music of the Greeks, by the additional accompaniment of the dance. The emotional character conveyed to the mind by the words, and to the ear by the tune, was further explained to the eye by gesture, pose, and beat of foot. The combination of the three modes of expression forming thus, in the Greek sense, a single imitative art. The dance as well as the melody came thus to have a definite ethical significance. It imitates, says Aristotle, character, emotion, and action. And Plato, in his ideal republic, would regulate by law the dances, no less than the melodies to be employed, distinguishing them too as morally good or morally bad, and encouraging the one while he forbids the other. The general Greek view of music, which has thus been briefly expounded, the union of melody and rhythm with poetry and the dance, in view of a definite and consciously intended ethical character, may be illustrated by the following passage of Plutarch, in which he describes the music in vogue at Sparta. The whole system, it will be observed, is designed with a view to that military courage which was the virtue most prized in the Spartan state, and the one about which all their institutions centred. Music at Sparta actually was what Plato would have had it in his ideal republic, a public and state regulated function. And even that vigorous race, which of all the Greeks came nearest to being Philistines of virtue, thought fit to lay a foundation purely aesthetic for their severe and soldierly ideal. Their instruction in music and verse, says Plutarch, was not less carefully attended to than their habits of grace and good breeding in conversation; and their very songs had a life and spirit in them that inflamed and possessed men's minds with an enthusiasm and ardour for action. The style of them was plain and without affectation, the subject always serious and moral. Most usually it was in praise of such men as had died in defence of their country, or in derision of those that had been cowards. The former they declared happy and glorified; the life of the latter they described as most miserable and abject. There were also vaunts of what they would do, and boasts of what they had done, varying with the various ages; as, for example, they had 3 choirs in their solemn festivals, the first of the old men, the second of the young men, and the last of the children. The old men began thus: "We once were young and brave and strong." The young men answered them, singing: "And we're so now, come on and try." The children came last and said: "But we'll be strongest by and by." Indeed, if we will take the pains to consider their compositions, and the airs on the flute to which they marched when going to battle, we shall find that Terpander and Pindar had reason to say that music and valour were allied. The way of regarding music which is illustrated in this passage, and in all that is said on the subject by Greek writers, is so typical of the whole point of view of the Greeks, that we may be pardoned for insisting once again on the attitude of mind which it implies. Music, as we saw, had an ethical value to the Greeks, but that is not to say that they put the ethics first and the music second, using the one as a mere tool of the other. Rather, an ethical state of mind was also, in their view, a musical one. In a sense something more than metaphorical, virtue was a harmony of the soul. The musical end was thus identical with the ethical one. The most beautiful music was also the morally best, and vice versa. Virtue was not prior to beauty, nor beauty to virtue. They were two aspects of the same reality, two ways of regarding a single fact. And if aesthetic effects were supposed to be amenable to ethical judgment, it was only because ethical judgments at bottom were aesthetic. The good and the beautiful were one and the same thing. That is the first and last word of the Greek ideal. And while thus, on the one hand, virtue was invested with the spontaneity and delight of art, on the other, art derived from its association with ethics emotional precision. In modern times, the end of music is commonly conceived to be simply and without more ado the excitement of feeling. Its value is measured by the intensity rather than the quality of the emotion which it is capable of arousing, and the auditor abandons himself to a casual succession of highly wrought moods, as bewildering in the actual experience as it is exhausting in the after effects. In Greek music, on the other hand, if we may trust our accounts, while the intensity of the feeling excited must have been far less than that which it is in the power of modern instrumentation to evoke, its character was perfectly simple and definite. Melody, rhythm, gesture, and words were all consciously adapted to the production of a single precisely conceived emotional effect. The listener was in a position clearly to understand and appraise the value of the mood excited in him. Instead of being exhausted and confused by a chaos of vague and conflicting emotion, he had the sense of relief which accompanies the deliverance of a definite passion, and returned to his ordinary business purged, as they said, and tranquillized, by a process which he understood, directed to an end of which he approved. End of chapter 4, section 4. Recording by Martin Geeson in Haslemere, Surrey.